Bond Town Hall. But that's a really great opportunity for people to understand the specifics of the $375 million bond proposal that will be on the ballots in November, as well as the authorization, the request for authorization to sell or lease or exchange 3 district properties. So very important opportunity to gather information, ask questions, and to be informed.
Okay, thank you. And speaking of funding, one of the questions submitted is, what is Prop 230 and how will it affect public education and SUSD?
All right, so I've been thinking a lot about Prop 230. Is it 230 or 320? Because all of a sudden I'm like, no, I think it's 320.
Yeah, it is 320.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, so I was going in my mental Rolodex to make sure I had the right prop. And so 320 is a proposal that asks whether or not certain school districts within the state of Arizona should be required to spend 60% of their operating budget on direct instruction. And there are a couple of things that are important to note about the proposition. The first thing is that it only applies to some schools. It applies to counties with more than 500,000 residents, of which there are only 3 in the state of Arizona: Maricopa, Pima, and Pinal. Those are the 3 counties. So all the school districts in those counties would be subject to this 60% requirement. Any school district outside of those 3 that enrolls more than 7,500 students, and these are traditional district schools, not charter schools, would also be subject to it. So small rural, not subject to it, unless they're in one of those 3 counties. No charter schools subject to it. And the practical implication is when you look underneath the hood, it sounds like a decent thing, 60% in direct instruction. But when you understand what's included in direct instruction and what's not, then it becomes a far more nuanced picture. And to understand how that plays out, if you look at the AZ Auditor General's report on school expenditures, and they do this every year for every school, you will see that in Scottsdale for 2025, 70.1%, something like that, was spent on classroom instruction. Of that, 54% was direct instruction. Then there was classroom support and instructional support. So there are 3 categories that lead to 70, but the direct instruction was 54%. The Auditor General. And that's how it's spelled out in the statute, too. They will define. So they could change the definition, but we're using the definition they have now. So what would not be included are things like social workers, counselors, speech and language pathologists, the school resource officers. Those are things that don't get counted. The cost of operating the HVAC system so that we have proper learning environments, that doesn't get counted. So there's a whole lot that is not counted. And if we had to move based on the numbers from the last audited year, it would be $14.9 million of reductions in all of those other non-direct instructional costs in order to meet that 60% threshold. And so do you think it should be school nurses that are eliminated, the SROs that are eliminated? Because if it's just SROs between our contract with Scottsdale Police Department and Phoenix, we're talking maybe $2.2 million. That doesn't get us to 14.9. So we're going to be putting together a fact sheet. We cannot advocate for or against a proposition with school resources or on school time, but we can provide factual information. So I think the question is well stated. Here's what it is. A yes vote would impose that requirement on the listed school systems. A no vote means that that requirement doesn't go into effect.
And you sort of answered the question that I was going to ask, which is 2 things. One, when will that fact sheet be able to be prepared, and can we share it with our SPC audience?
So Shannon's still working on it. She gave me the number today, but she had pencils on the piece of paper looking at it to give the numbers, so we want to make sure that it's completely reviewed, and once that's done, I would say within a week or 2 at most, so certainly by Labor Day, we should be able to have that available for people, and then you could share it.
Excellent, because I think that's a really good thing for all of us in SPC to understand the repercussions of what that 60% ballot question would be. And then the second question is at that September 23rd town hall, I know we're going to be talking about the bond, but if people have questions about that 60% proposition question, can they also ask you that
Yes.
at that town hall?
Yeah, we welcome the questions. And the other thing I should say about the fact sheet is it always has to go through legal review just to make sure that someone can't argue that, oh, yes, that was designed to influence the outcome of the election. We simply want to make sure people are armed with the facts with respect to the impact if it were to be approved.
Okay, great. Another question regarding security and things that could be cut. How can elementary schools get a security officer? Can they have one if they have a school psychologist?
So we have, and Josh is here to talk a little bit, we have reduced the number of our school security officers that we have, but the elementaries didn't all have one, and they didn't all have an SSO. But last year, most schools saw the presence of an SSO on their campus because we had some grant funding to be able to do that. At the end of last year, they opened up a grant process, and the schools had to identify, did they want to prioritize having a social worker or an SSO or an SRO? And for most of our elementary schools, the prioritization was the school social worker. And the rationale is pretty simple. When you're thinking about what a police officer does on the campus, they're ensuring the safety and security, monitoring perimeters, making sure there aren't strangers acting in bad ways. But what they don't do is address students who might be dysregulated and need some additional support. So social workers can engage in a supportive way for students or groups of students. Maybe there's some peer conflict, and a social worker can help navigate that. That's not the role of the police officer. So the principals, when given the choice, most of them prioritize the social workers, and we received funding for, was it all of the ones that we requested? And then we have a number of, we have 2 SSOs in the district this year, because 1 SRO position was converted to an SSO, and then we have all of the middle schools and high schools covered with SROs. So from an elementary perspective, we're exploring whether or not we can raise any funding separately to get uniformed officers, if that's the goal. And we don't have an answer yet, as I understand it, from legal counsel about what the mechanism would be, but that's part of what we'd have to investigate.
And then just as a reminder, but the October meeting, October 23rd, we are having a special presentation about security. So you can ask all your security questions. You can ask all your police officer SRO questions on the 21st of October.
All right, switching to sports and clubs. How does SUSD decide which high school sports they buy uniforms for and which they don't? Tennis is an example of a sport the school does not provide uniforms.
Really?
I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Well, Dr. Sackos is here, and since she oversees athletics, I'm going to give her an opportunity to answer that question.
Sure. Well, thank you for letting me know that we are not buying tennis.
So I'm not on this sport. I heard it at a Booster 101 meeting at my high school.
Okay, I will certainly work with Mr. Vontes, our director of athletics, to look into that. But the purchase of athletics is on a rotational basis, so it's on a cycle.
Yeah.
And so if tennis is not in that cycle, I will make sure it's in that cycle. And I'll ask you privately what school, so. Oh, say that again? Oh, okay.
Now you know. Okay. Are high school clubs allowed to communicate with members using Snapchat?
So students can communicate with each other, but not on official district business. So we would say if it's an authorized club, we do not recommend that at all because we've got authorized communication channels. But when friends are communicating in different ways, they may use Snapchat. We certainly don't endorse that for any official club purposes. Part of our obligation is to ensure that we have established communication channels that can be properly regulated so that we can protect our students.
Okay. And last question written down, what is happening with Echo Canyon? Is it occupied? If not, when will it be occupied?
So the board considered last spring several proposals for long-term leases of Echo Canyon, and they decided to hit the pause button on those long-term leases, in part because of some signals that they got from the individuals that were interested, some feedback from the community, and a desire to see where we end up with phase 2. so that rather than making a decision now and then having people say, well, if I would have known that these other facilities might be available, that would have been a preferable option. They decided to hit the pause button. Now we have a number of small renters that have expressed interest, and so we can do facility rentals like we used to do before. We still have the Arcadia Little League. We have the IGA with the city of Scottsdale for use of the gym. So there's some activity on the campus, but it's small in comparison. We have a commitment to upkeep and maintenance of the facility, and expect that after the board makes its decision on phase 2, we can then turn our attention to what next for Echo Canyon that will be a compatible use for what the community wants, will generate revenue for the district, and be a good use of that asset.
All right, thank you. And then we wanted to open it up to the floor if there's any other questions. If it's a repurposing question, maybe save it till after we get to speak on that. But are there any other questions before we proceed? No? Okay. All right, let's move on to, yep. Let's see, which one?
It's that one.
Okay. All righty, take it away.
So we appreciate the opportunity to give a high-level overview of the Phase 2 school repurposing project. And from my perspective, I want to just talk a little bit about the overarching commitment here. And so if you've watched governing board members' meetings, you know that there's been a conversation about full and thriving schools, and the fact that over the past 15 plus years, we've declined in enrollment by more than 6,000 students. The board's reviewed all the demographic data. There are some very difficult decisions to make, and boards could prioritize keeping all the schools open, but that means you have to cut in different ways, and ways that this board at least has expressed they don't want to do. We don't want to cut school nurses. We don't want to not have the full complement of what it means to attend an SUSD school. So last year they made the decision in phase 1 to bring 2 schools offline, Pima and Echo Canyon. Pima ended up getting repurposed as a Level D special education program, so that district asset is being utilized for that and other purposes. And so that's a beneficial use of a facility that's been repurposed. Phase 2 included schools up in the Desert Mountain Learning Community as well as Copper Ridge. And so the 3 people who were charged with facilitating the second half of the phase 2 conversation with the committee that was appointed are here with us today. So Dr. Sakos, Leah Mitchell, and Dr. Bono spent a lot of their summer working with community volunteers from all of the schools, along with some of the teachers and the principals who came to the meetings but were not part of the committee, vetting and looking at the details with respect to the 3 options that the Phase 2 committee in Part A had identified. So I'm going to turn it over to them to kind of walk you through the work that was done in the spring, the work that was done in the summer, and then kind of telegraph what's next with respect to board conversations before we open it up for Q&A. I don't know who's going to kick us off.
I'm happy to. Thank you guys so much. Hello, for those of you who haven't had the opportunity to meet, I am Leah Mitchell. I get to serve here as the Assistant Superintendent of Education Services, which means I get to do all the very best stuff in teaching and learning and supporting our students. I'll give a brief overview of kind of how we formed the committee, what we did in Part A, what we did in Part B, and where we are now. But first, I want to make sure everybody knows that we have some very clear places where this information is publicly available that everybody could see. So on our district website, on the homepage right there, there's a button right in the middle that will say, I think, school repurposing. On that page, it tells the story of how we got here. It provides a variety of different pieces of information about last year, phase 1, current phase 2, and what comes after, which is phase 3. So each one of those have a button where you can learn more. In the Phase 2 tab, it shares details about the formation of the committee, the purpose, and the background, and it also gives you information to the committee hub. That committee hub has every single meeting summary, the slide decks, the agendas, and most recently, we posted on that committee hub a comprehensive governing board memo. I think it's many pages, 25 pages. It has about 193 embedded links, and those 193 links represent data, information, maps, financial analysis, capacity, transportation, all sorts of enrollment information. And so we would encourage anyone and everyone to please take a moment to look at those websites, especially given your interest, where how this may or may not impact you. We want to make sure everybody has the opportunity to know where that is, get to it just in a couple of clicks. And should you have any questions, you can always through Let's Talk on our website, submit it on Flow, Let's Talk on Flow dialogue, and we are happy to respond, or you can reach out to any of the three of us and we're happy to answer questions. But we did form a committee in the spring. We asked for applications from all of the impacted communities and we had overwhelming response, I think nearly 200 families. We selected representatives from each impacted school, and they got to spend tons and tons and tons of time together reviewing some of the data I spoke to you about. Capacity, enrollment, trends over years and years, all sorts of information in that first Part A is what we called it. And that was really grounding us in the current state. Why are we here? Also then in Part A, we worked with a demographer, Rick Bremer, who has done demographic studies for SUSD for a number of years. He worked with us through those demographic studies to help develop a variety of models for consideration of the group. So we first started with 6 different kind of models. These are different ways we could arrange, configure schools in that area for people just to think about, brainstorm. What are the benefits? What are the drawbacks of each one? Through that effort, the committee also identified 2 additional models they wanted to bring forward for further consideration and investigation. So we spent a good amount of time investigating, sharing those models, providing those details, maps, again, all that data that I have shared before, enrollment, capacity, financials, transportation, and narrowing their scope, coming to some level of general consensus, not full agreement. That's important to note. We weren't asking for 100% full agreement. We were asking us to get to a place, can we live with these next options? And so that Part A, they finished, I think it was early May, and they narrowed from 8 options to 3. We gave them the opportunity. 8 seemed like a lot for the next phase of study. If you wanted to bring forward up to 5, that was fine. And really, we ended up with 3 additional models to study much more deeply, and a strong desire from the team to hear from the community. And so during that first Part A, we also developed survey instruments for parents, community members, and staff at each impacted school. Those committee members looked at the questions, formulated additional ones, until we got to the just right balance. We didn't want it to be too long, but we wanted to make sure you get enough information. And I'm sure all of you feel similar about surveys as I do. I'm happy to take them, except for if I get to like question number 25 and 26 and 27. And so we wanted to be thoughtful. That sort of wrapped our Part A. I made jokes throughout the time that I call it a Part A, like party, you know. But it was hard work, and we tried to make it fun, but everybody worked very diligently on it. We broke from that committee, took a break. Anyone who wanted to continue in Part B was more than welcome. Because it was happening in the summer, we had a number of members who travel over the summer or like, we loved this, but unfortunately we weren't able to. So we went back to our application pool of the people who were really that next wait list of folks and invited some more friends to join. We had about 10-ish, maybe less than, I'd say between 8 and 10 additional members that joined us for Part B. In Part B, we did similar. We dove down deep in the configurations, the enrollment, the transportation. We spent lots of hours reviewing survey data and survey information. What did the parents at each community think? What did the parents across all the communities think? What did the teachers, each one of the surveys, the teams that were organized into, I think, 7 different tables. I'm making eye contact for those of you in the room as a couple of our committee members are here, so I'm just making sure. We had 7 tables. Each table was comprised of people representing mixed communities. And so it wasn't one school pitted against another school. It was really heterogeneous groups that we were trying to see how can we make sure we have a robust conversation and all the perspectives at the table. And so through that committee work, we analyzed and analyzed and analyzed. And then, as we analyzed, we asked the committee members to do what is called a SWOT analysis. So looking at each model and identifying the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats, right? Just what does each model of these present? Our committee was not charged to bring forward to our governing board a recommendation. We were charged with bringing forward options for consideration and analysis of those considerations. So I think Dr. Sakos is going to talk in just a moment a little bit more about the SWOT process. And then after the SWOT process, Dr. Bono led some pretty intense work around boundaries. So Dr. Sakos will talk about SWOTs, and then Dr. Bono will talk about boundaries.
Sure. Has anybody ever participated in a SWOT analysis? A couple of you. So the way we did it for this committee is we allowed each team member to have their own worksheet and to work through in their own mind what are the strengths, weaknesses, opportunity, threats for each model. And then we allowed them as a table group to come to some consensus or agreement around the top ones that they had as a group. We took all of that information from all the tables, did a synthesis of all of that, brought it back to the next meeting, posted it all over the room, and allowed for, let's go through this one more time. Are we missing anything? So you taking the information from all the 7 table groups, are we missing anything? And so we took the time to go through it line by line and came to consensus, and I'm looking to at some of you on the committee, that this represented what each of the table groups had put down in terms of their thoughts around the 3 models. So we spent, I believe, a significant amount of time talking about it. I was really proud of the committee because, individuals would offer different perspectives, such as Shea Corridor. What's the Shea Corridor? Does that include Laguna, Cochise, Sequoia? And so, again, once somebody heard the definition of the Shea Corridor, they're like, oh, thank you for that understanding. So very collaborative, very open-minded individuals, and it was a pleasure to be a part of. So with that, like Leah said, there's a lot of information on the website. You will see the raw information that came from the table groups from one meeting, and then you will also see a summary from all 3 of them for each of the different models. Any questions about SWOT? Nope. Okay. Dr. Bono.
In all of our talk on phase 2, which we've been living and breathing, we didn't tell you the options or the models. Also important to note, yes, I'm glad the postcard landed. I got a text from one of my colleagues in the room about 10 o'clock the other night, and she's like, did you get the postcard? And I said, well, that would require me to check my mail, which I get the nasty notes. It goes to mail jail every now and again. So I went, and among about a month's worth of mail, the postcard was there. So also important to note, and I think Leah might have misspoke a little bit, that when we talk about the options, the board did not ask us. We, at the end, will provide the board all this information, and we'll talk about that timeline. But these marching orders, if you will, or these parameters under which we worked, came from our superintendent as a superintendent's committee. So when we worked through those options, which I'll explain, that's kind of where we arrived from this whole process. So option A is, so let me back up. In part 1, or part A, when we worked with the demographer, and all 8 options were numbered. So for part B, we switched to letters because we didn't have 1, 2, and 3. So just the terms of art you'll see in the board memo. If you can't sleep tonight and you want to read it, you will see in great detail. So option A takes Laguna Elementary, and I'm geographically pointing, and Redfield Elementary, and merges them together on the current Cheyenne traditional campus. Then the Cheyenne program would pick up and be moved to Copper Ridge. Copper Ridge is up north near like DC Ranch. Well, the DC Ranch, the CTDS, which is another term of art, which is that ID number that the state calls each school, that would close. So Copper Ridge would close. Laguna and Redfield would collapse, if you will, and would merge onto that building where Cheyenne currently is. We'll talk about boundaries here in a second. So then option B has Desert Canyon Elementary and Middle becoming a K-8 and moving up to Copper Ridge. So Copper Ridge essentially would close. Desert Canyon K-8 would move up to that building. And it has Laguna closing. And we'll talk here about those potential boundaries. Option C takes our two currently lowest enrolled schools, Copper Ridge and Laguna. They both would close, and then their boundaries would be distributed. So when we talk about boundaries, all of that work is rooted in board policy. We unfortunately, we had to do this last year when it came to Pima. Echo is not a boundary school, but Pima was, so I was able to learn a lot and work with a great group of people, just like this year, on what that process is. So when we talk about option A, again, we started out with 6 boundary options, 2 for each model. They expanded a little bit, especially as it relates to middle school feeder pattern. Again, that won't be decided until the board votes to choose to make a decision. To rewind a little bit, when we went through Pima and Echo repurposing and closing last year, those processes were bifurcated, meaning the governing board made a decision in December to close Echo and Pima, and then we started the boundary work. We're doing them all at the same time, which is typically, in my experience and learning from our general counsel and folks, that's typically how it's done. So that's what we're doing. So all of that to say, there's many boundary options. The boundary comes into play as it relates to really transportation. We're an open enrolled state, so you can choose to go anywhere as long as there's capacity. And as I'll talk about each briefly under each model. So to your question, under option A, Laguna picks up, Redfield picks up, and they go to Cheyenne. All of the boundary grids, which I feel like I know in my sleep now, they would be zoned to the New Cheyenne. We don't have a name for that school yet. I'm calling it the New Cheyenne, but it's of course not going to be called the New Cheyenne. So all of those schools would be boundaried to that campus for elementary school. Then we have a couple of different options about, well, where do they go for middle school? There's one option that says, like I live in the Laguna neighborhood, if Laguna's my home school now, my middle school would stay Mountainside. If Redfield's my home school, my middle school would stay Desert Canyon. That's one option. And the board really, or the committee in Part B, really talked about the benefit of that, even though none of this is beneficial. I use that word meaning as we were comparing the other options, because one of the other options was, well, then let's make them all Desert Canyon or all Mountainside. Well, that would, in essence, potentially eradicate the populations of those schools potentially, right? So we don't know what will be the outcome of that because the board has yet to hear, and we'll talk about, again, that timeline when they will hear more of this in great detail. For Copper Ridge, well, let me back up to Cheyenne. When we met with communities a year ago and talked about the potential of what this process would look like, there were a lot of families, in particular at Cheyenne, who said, I love Cheyenne, I love the traditional model, but you know what I love more? That I live across the street and my kids can walk. So no matter what's here, my family's gonna stay here. So what that could look like is if the 290 Laguna families and the 300 and, thank you, Redfield families come to the New Cheyenne campus and about 150 of the current families choose to stay, that could be, right? But if you live currently near Copper Ridge and you don't want to stay in that building, you don't want to be at Cheyenne for whatever reason, you could want to take a bus, one of the options would be you'd be bused to Desert Canyon. Yes. It's about, so
The question
Cheyenne
was
is
about enrollment.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the question was, does Cheyenne work under a lottery? All of our schools have, whether it's be regular enrollment or open enrollment. So for example, I live right by Laguna. Laguna's my home school. I'm always guaranteed a spot there. Cheyenne, similar to Echo Canyon and Pueblo, they're schools of choice. So there are no boundaries. So meaning you participate in when open enrollment starts on November 1st, you start, and then we have priority enrollment groups, which are on our website, but I'm happy later to explain them also to you. So for example, if you have a sibling or you live in the boundary versus someone who has no siblings, maybe coming from another city nearby. So it's not so much a lottery as it is a process to determine enrollment. That would stay, yeah, that whatever, where if we go with option A and the Cheyenne program moves to the current Copper Ridge building, everything would stay the same in terms of their pillars of their traditional model. They would be boundary-less. So for example, if I lived next door to that building, their house would be way nicer than the one I live in now, but I'm grateful. But if I lived across the street right now from Copper Ridge, my home school in option A, if the board were to go with one of our options, would be Desert Canyon. Because Cheyenne, so right now, if you live across the street from Cheyenne, your home school is Redfield. So under all of those options, there are different boundary. One of the reasons, a lot of people said, well, why did Chaparral Complex get that postcard? We're not talking about Chaparral. Well, Copper Ridge is not in the Desert Mountain Learning Community. It's the Chaparral Learning Community. So if you are an 8th grader at Copper Ridge, your home high school is Chaparral. It also came into play because one of the boundary options that the committee explored was taking 4 cells, I believe, 3 or 4 cells, it equals about 26 kids, I also believe, from Laguna area, and making Cochise their home school. So that would change their whole feeder pattern. They would leave the Desert Mountain Complex and go to Chaparral, Cochise, Cocoa Pass, Chaparral. The board discussed that too. The board did not come to consensus on that. They said that's not our ideal, but remember, I'm sorry, not the board, our committee, yep. The committee's like, we don't like that idea very much. It was almost a mixed bag a little bit. Again, we will provide all that information to the board for them to extrapolate the different nuances of it in order to make the best decision.
Are there any other questions about that section? Because I know it's a lot of information.
It's a lot of information.
Yeah, let me bring it over here so
Amy.
the recording can get it. One moment.
And Amy was one of our amazing community members and families. What? She's on witness protection. I'm sorry.
no.
I'm sorry, Amy Fergus, that you're on witness protection.
Doubted me. So I've read the memo to the best of my ability. It doesn't, the boundary discussion is not like the dots that we put on. There's no discussion about the committee's preferences with the
Yep.
boundaries.
So thank you for that. So what Amy's saying is I had these posters made a couple of times now because we had 4 meetings. We called a 5th meeting to go really more in depth with boundaries, and the committee was able to put dots to favor that. That was not part of the board memo, but that's going to be part of the September 8th information discussion item, where they're going to see, hey, when we went through this first, and granted it's not a vote, so I'm not trying to be pejorative with saying, well, it was 6-1. It was, this is what the committee's feedback was based on those.
Any other questions?
So again, Copper Ridge question just in how it pertains to the Chaparral learning. So in those 2 examples, Copper Ridge disseminates of sorts. So what is that number of students that are at Copper Ridge that then would no longer feed into the Chaparral community?
Please hold. Oh, look at you. So under option A, you know what we can look at is the historical data. So for the option A, for each of the models, option A with Redfield and Laguna going to Cheyenne and Cheyenne going to Copper Ridge, it impacts roughly 2,300 kids. But your question is more, out of the 80 some odd
Right.
8th graders, are you asking more about the feeder pattern?
I guess, yes, but so the schools that could go into the Copper Ridge campus, will they then, their
see what
feeder
you're saying.
pattern
Yes.
is going to go where?
So for
'Cause I'm
example,
assuming it doesn't come to Chaparral anymore?
correct. Well, so out of the 3 options, option A, the Cheyenne building, the program, we pick them up and we place it at the Copper Ridge building. One of the options was homeschool moves to Desert Mountain, or homeschool could be Chaparral. Again, the committee had some strong feelings about that. We also looked at the number. So when we looked at our boundary, and it's linked in the B memo, but when we're done, I can actually show you. When we looked at those actual boundary cells, there's a specific number of students that would be impacted. So for example, we have a parent on our committee. She has a sophomore and an 8th grader at Copper Ridge. Her high schooler goes to Chaparral. They rely on a bus. So we talked about what might that be, a recommendation to the board about grandfathering in transportation. We haven't gotten that far yet.
Right.
But in both of those, and then option B, Desert Canyon picks up and moves to the Copper Ridge building. Similarly, that home school would now be Desert Mountain.
So how many kids are in Copper Ridge as a whole school at this moment? A couple hundred?
80 K5 and 150 K8.
Okay. Okay. So like roughly 300 kids eventually could not roll into the Chaparral Learning Program and would stay or would transition into the Desert Mountain Learning Program. Like I'm thinking, right.
For transportation
I'm-
only,
I'm
but
not
they
thinking
could
about
open and roll.
transportation. I'm thinking like 5 years down the road, we're gonna have less kids at Chaparral because of this, right?
Potentially, but what we also looked at was the current number, and again, it's in one of our documents that it's linked, but I'm also happy to share it with you.
Yeah.
The current number of kids, for example, at Cheyenne of 8th graders, how many go to Chaparral, how many go to Desert Mountain,
Right.
and currently, how many 8th graders currently at Copper Ridge go to Chaparral versus Desert Mountain currently. And then really quickly, under option C, where Laguna and Copper Ridge close, similarly, those boundaries are redrawn to be absorbed into Desert Canyon and or Desert Mountain or Chaparral.
So just a clarification question on her question. When does your home high school stay the same? So if your home school right now is Copper Ridge, you go to Copper Ridge as your primary school. You then feed into Chaparral. Even if Copper Ridge didn't no longer existed, wouldn't you still feed into Chaparral if you feed into Chaparral today, and into Desert Mountain if you feed into Desert Mountain today?
Yep.
vice
And that was
versa?
one of our options we talked about. So you'll see that the board will hear that. They will hear, hey, can we just leave the high school pattern, have them stay boundaried to Chaparral? And that will be something the board can consider to vote on, or move it to Desert Mountain. And we'll break it down, and we have it broken down in the board memo, the number of cells and then the number of students that are impacted potentially.
Are you considering how many current Cheyenne 8th graders go to Desert Mountain versus Chaparral? Because it's significant.
Yes, we actually have that.
I think last year, 2 went to Chaparral and about 50
No.
or so went to Desert Mountain.
It's not,
Cheyenne.
no, it wasn't that. Again, I can pull that up. It wasn't that disparate. We had our enrollment people pull it for our committee in real time to review it. I don't know if one of you have it.
Cheyenne.
Correct, Cheyenne, yes. Yes, when we
Yeah.
reviewed the 8th graders at Cheyenne, to say out of all the 8th graders, we broke it down by,
Hold on.
hang on.
It was,
No,
well,
I got it here.
I had an 8th grader last year at Cheyenne, and the breakdown that I saw at the time was about 50 went to Desert Mountain, and only about 2 or 3 went to Chaparral. But if your numbers are showing something different, that's,
We will find that. I mean, it's on our website as well, but now it's bothering me because I know we were looking at it in the document.
So I just have a question in regards to kind of process, because this is extremely confusing to talk about. We've got option A, B, and C, and then also the boundaries. So is the governing board going to decide on an A, B, or C first and then decide on the boundaries? Because just for
Right.
clarity's sake.
So I think this is a good opportunity to kind of paint the picture of where we go from here. So there's an extraordinary amount of data, and the data is framed in a way that if the board were to choose to say, I want to do option A with boundary option 1, they could do that. But we won't know that, and that's why the next steps in the process are really important. So September 8th is the first time where they as a board will be having a public conversation about the information that's been presented to them. So they have the 3 options, they've got the boundary, they got all of the supporting documents, and that's when we're gonna, you and us, that'll be the first time that we hear what additional questions do they have? What things do they observe or wonder about? Is there information that they would like to have in order to inform the decision they're ultimately gonna have to make? So it could be that it was straightforward and they say we want option A with boundary option 1 or 2. That could be that. They also, because this is permitted under law, it's properly agendized when they decide. So it won't be September 8th, but on October 6th, when we hope they decide, they could say, we like option A, but we want to make these changes, you know, in terms of X, Y, and Z. And so they can modify an option A, an option B, or an option C. So they have a lot of discretion that way. It's set up so that it's sort of like when you go to the eye doctor and you do like option 1 or option 2. The boundary options became a little bit like that to say, well, if you want to hold in status quo for high school patterns for option A, then you have to have a SHAP option. But when you look at the map, does it make sense from a geographical perspective to feed into Desert Mountain High School? Truth is, they're about equidistant between the two, and so it's more of a preference question. For some of the other options, we looked at, because we have questions about, you know, what's the impact on enrollment in other schools, and so that's part of where the board will be looking at that data to say, okay, what makes the most sense? But the Phase 2 Part B committee really wrestled with some of those questions, and so they did land on what they thought made more sense. Ultimately, the governing board will weigh that along with all the other information, and we know that there's going to be no shortage of information, thoughts, perspectives shared by families in all of the other schools. That's on the hearing on September 22nd. So between the information discussion item on the 8th, the hearing on the 22nd, then hopefully a decision point on October 6th, they'll kind of ferret through those things. But I don't anticipate a staged decision. I think that, I mean, they might signal it's option A, and then they could debate, okay, where do we want to land on the boundaries, or option B or option C. But they won't. It won't be set up on the agenda, at least as far as I know, to be vote on the models first, then vote on the boundaries second. The intent was to put it all together, and then once someone's ready to make a motion, have second, then they can vote on it. Does that help?
Yes, a little bit.
Okay.
Thank you.
It's really complicated. So it's not an easy thing to wrap your head around.
And also, all of this to say, I am more than happy as you're I call them the 3 o'clock in the morning questions as you're thinking about all that. If you can't sleep, read the memo. But please reach out to me. I'm happy to call you. I can do a Teams call. I can walk you kind of through the different iterations. The reason it's so important for that decision to be made, ideally in October, right? We don't know. That's our hope and wish and dream, is because our open enrollment starts November 1st. So we want to be sure that our families have adequate time to make decisions. Last year, when the decision was made in December, very grateful to the team and to our families. We were able to get people tucked in, but the sooner we know, the sooner we're able to individually help each family. Do we feel?
Like, well, I mean, so it feels like this process has really slowed down quite a bit, this phase 2 versus phase 1. And I'm at the board meetings each month, so I feel that. But this time frame for the board feels really tight. And if I know anything about the diocese, there's select few folks that often feel that they don't have the information that they need to make the right decisions. And that pushes us back and pushes us back. So how do we go from September 8th, they're asking questions, September 22nd, we're having an open hearing, October 6th, we're making a decision? Like, do we feel comfortable?
So those dates, and that's a great point of the timeline. So September 8th, it's a general information discussion meeting or discussion item at the general meeting, right? Lots of public comment, I'm sure, will be that night. We will give our presentation along with all the other things on the agenda. Then September 22nd is a public hearing, and that's statutorily required. Also in the statute, it says the board can't make a decision less than 10 days after that hearing, which is where October 6th comes in.
I'll answer the question. It's anybody's guess. So the truth of the matter is, the governing board doesn't have to meet the timeline that we put in place. That timeline was established based on what we learned in phase 1 and the impact on families. And so we also have a second meeting in October on the 27th. Arguably, they could do that. It really compresses how we ensure we're ready for November 1st open enrollment, but it would still be before November 1st. by law, you've got to have the public hearings within a certain time frame, but they could decide in March or April if they wanted to close schools. They don't have, that's an artificial constraint on our end, but it's a constraint designed to ensure that we're taking into account the best interest of the families who will be impacted. So I think the board is motivated by making the decision so families know. And so I expect that before the end of October, we will have a decision. That decision may not be A, B, or C. That decision could be any number of things. It has to be within the parameters of the schools that were listed in the postcard that everybody got. They can't go outside those bounds. That's the line that's drawn. So there won't be a wild card surprise at the end, but they could modify or tweak within those bounds. I expect them to make a decision so that there's certainty for families with respect to the Phase 2 decision.
We did have one question over here, just to simplify all of those three, the A, B, C. Could you say in each instance, how many campuses would be closed in each instance, and which one? So it's 2 in every instance? Closed, not repurposed with
So-
another school.
So the language, think about
Buildings.
think about the buildings
Buildings.
and the CTDS, which is the number for a school. So, and the reason why that's important is if you're at Desert Canyon Elementary School, it's got a CTDS. Desert Canyon Middle School has a separate CTDS. It's an elementary and a middle. They're on the same property. Under options A and C, it's contemplated that they could be brought together as a K-8. They'd only have one CTDS. So on paper, you have one less school, but you haven't closed a building in that scenario. So that's one part. For the rest, you'll have 2 buildings coming offline. In option A, it's Redfield and Laguna. In option C, it's Copper Ridge and Laguna. So those are the 2 buildings that would be coming offline to be repurposed in some fashion. And then there's always that open question of, do you merge Desert Canyon Elementary and Middle School to have on paper the reduction of 1 more CTDS? Smaller cost savings because it's not a full building. It's just streamlining administrative structure to get some cost efficiencies. Does that answer the question?
I believe so.
Did you have a question?
Oh, yes, another question over here.
Okay, so if I was a board member, or more importantly, families, I would be maybe curious to hear, how did it go in Echo Canyon and Pima? Do you have data on how many students left the district? Was it included in this report? Is it allowed to be included? What did you learn? Those kinds of things, and because of course we're only 1 year later, what happened to those 8th graders? Did they go to Arcadia, or were they so upset they went to a charter? Or
Yes, I have that. Sorry, I was not texting or checking my email. I was just pulling up an email with this information. So thank you so much for the question related to the matriculation of Echo and Pima. I do provide governing board updates related to Phase 1 relatively regularly. My last update just alerted that after the 10-day count, we would be looking at all of the data. And so I actually anticipate on Friday being able to provide a more comprehensive detailed report on everything. But what I can tell you is absolutely studying the matriculation of kiddos from both Echo and Pima is essential in how we can potentially anticipate things will go. Different families, different schools, different communities, but still it gives us some level of heads up. So when we think about Echo Canyon, and we're talking really K-7 enrollment, that 8th grade, I'll have to get back into some different numbers for you. But of the K-7 students, that were enrolled really on that last day of school, we had about 197, again, taking out those 8th graders. Of those 197 students, 159 of them returned into SUSD schools. So that was about 81%. That is Echo Canyon. It was a boundaryless school. And so there was no residential boundary. Of that school, we had 38 students in that overall count that were open enrolled. So they were not students that were residential boundaries of SUSD. And when I look at that, 22 of those students did not return to SUSD, but 16 of them did. And so that's where the number in Echo Canyon is around that 81%. When we look at Pima Elementary, which was a zoned or a boundary school, residential boundaries. They got new boundaries to Hohokam and Yavapai. At the end of the school year, K4 is really what this looks at, because those matriculation grades will look a little bit different. We had 230 students enrolled at the end of the school year. 209 have enrolled in SUSD for 91%. And so that really did more or less track similarly to the numbers that we were wrapping up the year with. I looked at them almost every single week between decision to the end of the year, and then we just have to wait for the summer to see how things fall out. What I can tell you also is when we look at where students landed and where students ended up once we closed those schools, the vast majority of Pima students did attend their zoned schools. The largest number of students at one school beyond their boundary is Navajo Elementary. But the Pima students really did sort of scatter plot, majority in their boundary, but there are students from those schools that went to, I think, 10 other of our SUSD elementaries. The Echo Canyon students, there wasn't any dense saturation in the same way with Hohokam and Yavapai. However, what we see is proximity probably did play into it a little bit. A larger number of the Echo Canyon families do now attend to Vaughn. And I did look at their 8th graders, or their middle schoolers, I'm sorry, because it was a K-8. I'm like, how do I have that? And it was their 6th and 7th graders that are now 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. A large number of the middle school students from Echo Canyon are now at Ingleside Middle School. So I think between 50 and 60-ish additional. The next highest number of students were at Mojave, and I think a couple others in a couple other places.
I think it's always important to look at this from what the problems that we have in the schools that we're talking about. And if you'd allow me to summarize from what I recall, please correct me if I'm wrong. Copper Ridge is under-enrolled, Laguna's under-enrolled, Redfield's under-enrolled. Cheyenne is at max capacity or closer to max capacity, and Desert Mountain is kind of right there in the sweet spot. Desert Canyon, thank you. Kind of there in the sweet spot. So I think it's just important to frame this discussion with what the challenges are and looking at it with what's going to solve all these problems and these challenges we currently have today. So I just, more of a comment than a question, but I think it's an important thing to keep on the front of your mind why we're talking about
And I
this.
love that this is streaming too, because I'll probably go back and record. It was so clear and precise, your Reader's Digest version of the summary, and in such parent-friendly language too. I know we can get sort of, we live in this, right? All the links that we prepared to send, we generally also generated those documents. And so thank you for summarizing it so cleanly and clearly. One thing I don't know that I summarized related to the committee work is after we talked about boundaries, after we talked about models, throughout the entire time, we talked about core principles that we wanted to keep as our anchor for discussion, right? It wasn't just willy-nilly. It wasn't all about the money. It was really about the student experience, the financial viability long-term, and the sustainability. I have the other ones pulled up somewhere here. I want to make sure I'm accurate in giving those guiding principles to you. They are in the B memo, but the reason I want to be accurate in giving those, so I'll look again, is each member then individually scored the models, score of 1 to 5 based on a rubric that we had, and gave their input on each model, their scores. They also were given the opportunity to provide written feedback. How did they feel about each model? What questions do they have? And then about the overall facilitation of the process. That is also all summarized in the B memo. And I think what the B memo would show and what the number scoring would summarize is it matched really what we found from the desire of the committee. There seemed to be a desire to impact the fewest students. That seemed to be like, Model C, which is closed down Copper Ridge, unfortunately, and Laguna, unfortunately, and Reboundary. There was, however, conversations within the individual scores of family or of participants that sort of flagged potentially option A as potential future viability because it relocates Cheyenne program. There was in the committee conversations around an opportunity to grow that program. And so there was conversations really around what could bring more students to us so that we can also get out from under our own decline and potentially Scottsdale is an incredible school district, and we are the best game in town. We know this because so many kids open enroll already and are doing awesome. And so we want to have the opportunity to draw more kids, and that became part of the conversation of the Cheyenne of it all. And so that's where I think you would see in the committee analysis of their scoring, that's where you may see just a large favoring of C because it impacts the fewest students, but some conversations from different committee members saying, like, if we wanted to increase or generate revenue potentially long-term, option A may be something worthy of consideration.
So that just kind of led me to a question I had surrounding the option B, where you would be taking more students and moving them to a different campus. And then if the specialty programs that are at Desert, so I'm in the Desert Canyon, but Desert Canyon Elementary and Middle, so the CGB program and the Mandarin, which are actually, I know a lot of people who actually come from out of district or like, open enroll specifically for those. Would those just go to the other campus or would those be gone?
Oh, so I'm so glad you asked that. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All of the specialty programs within the conversation were highly valued by everybody in the committee. And so that was very clear to us, like, we have to continue to offer those specialty programs. And likely in some of them, they would stay where they are. With the option B, turning it into a K-8 does complicate a little bit because, I'm so sorry. That's me, sorry, it complicates it only slightly because the comprehensive gifted program in the elementary is at Redfield that currently feeds to Desert Canyon Middle School, which is a standalone middle, right? Our dual language immersion is at Desert Canyon Elementary, Desert Canyon Middle School. So there is probably some conversation around comprehensive gifted, should we make that move, because it does and can feel odd at times potentially if you go to a K-5 school and then you matriculate up for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade to a K-8. That might, kids could feel certain ways about that. But ensuring that we have those specialty programs available was a very high priority.
Okay, and then just kind of following up on that with on student experience of just kind of understanding with people that may not know the difference between a K-8 and a true separate middle. Like I know when we moved to Arizona, we specifically chose a school that was a separate middle because it's a entirely different teaching philosophy. So just kind of, wanting to see if that's also something that's being kind of flagged for the board.
We did ask our families, so that's where you would see in each family's survey information. We actually explicitly asked preferences related to K-8 schools, 6-8, and there was a variety of responses there. I think you are correct. What you would find often in a K-8 model of instruction, it's more similar across all 9 of those grades, whereas if you go to a traditional middle school, not traditional in terms of Cheyenne traditional programming, but a typical grades, let's 6, 7, 8, or 7, 8, depending on what district you're in here, it is much more like a high school or like a secondary programming. What we find here, especially when it comes to K-8s and the middle school, our enrollment is generally smaller than what would be a comprehensive middle school, which starts to impact opportunity for students. When you have a smaller number of middle school students, you can't generate the same type of income to be able to offer a really wide array of electives. And so let's say if you went to CocoPa today, you may have many more electives choices outside of ELA, English, Math, Science, Social Studies, than you might say at Copper Ridge, where they don't have enough students to generate the finances to offer the volume of courses that the kids express interest in. And so that's definitely something that hangs in the conversation in some as well. And I think that's where we see difference in family preference. We have some family preferences who love the K-8, my kids are all together, they don't grow up so fast. And then there are others we see that are really hungry for opportunities and more electives options and a variety of pathways. And so that's really how the difference plays out.
Thank you. Sorry, anyone else? Yep.
comment. As I was on the Phase 2 committee, we were asked to not necessarily think of programming in specific schools that we were considering either collapsing or closing. Because if you think about it, the rebounding of students puts many schools that are at 50 to 60% capacity right now to 70 to 85% capacity. And once those students are readjusted into their new homes, then seeing what programming is not only able to be provided, prioritizing, obviously, I think it was special ed is the most important priority, but then also what the needs and wants of the students are in those schools. So the program capacity versus physical capacity is an important question when you're talking about what programs are offered at the new schools.
Absolutely. And thank you again so much for all of your time. I know, you guys are awesome. You say it so good. I did want to just reference back, I mentioned in the rubric and the scoring criteria that there were just different principles. I just wanted to make sure I've stated those accurately. So first was around the evaluation area of student-centered decision-making. The second was financial viability and academic success. The third was facility optimization. The fourth was strategic, future-focused, and sustainable. And the final was overall community impact and implementation feasibility. So they had a 5-point rubric around each of those 5 principles. And you can see in the summary of the information, really down to the actual number score for each one of the cells. And I think also in the summary, you can see the average and the median as well.
Does anybody else have any questions? Okay, well, I have a question. So since we are a parent informational organization, like I'm coming at this question from that angle. And I know the distribution of responsibilities between what the board is deciding versus what this superintendent's committee is deciding, and obviously not deciding anything, but just doing a landscape survey and then providing whatever information they found and then presenting it to the board. So let's say that you are a parent, whether or not you're at one of these schools that's in option A, B, or C, and at this point, you sort of are thinking like, okay, I want to give my opinion on this. At this point, now where are you supposed to go and what are you supposed to do? Who are you supposed to talk to? Are you supposed to talk to the board? Are you supposed to email them? When are you supposed to do that? What are you supposed to say? So if you're a parent, like, what are you supposed to do now?
What are you supposed to do? I am definitely, I'll probably turn over to Dr. Menzel, but one thing I can share for sure is our board does want to hear from you. They really, really value the feedback and the input from families. They want to know. It's a really big and difficult decision. And so we would say for families, don't hesitate to reach out. We do have on that webpage and also on our SUSD webpage, it's called Let's Talk. There is a dialogue specific to repurposing. And so if they wanted to go there, they can submit their questions, their comments, their ideas, any of those types of things. And then Ms. Harrington works to ensure that the governing board members each have copies of all of those dialogues that are sent. Also, emails, we typically will see a variety of emails that come through as well. And we work to include all of those things. But really what we found in phase 1, the dialogue in Let's Talk allowed for us to be the fastest in response because there's a number of us that are on those dialogues. And so if it's just an email, it may go to a few of us, but it might get in our 300 emails in the day. But Let's Talk is something we all highly prioritize and knock out each day, and there's a bigger team of us. So that's what we would say. Please express opinions. Please ask questions. We will aim to get back as much as we can as quickly as we can. But we don't want anybody to feel like it would be stepping out or wrong or weird. No, these are your children. These are your communities. We absolutely value the engagement, the conversations, the opinions. Like Dr. Menzel said, there is no good option. And so being here together is where we are.
So I'll add to that. People are already emailing the governing board. And so that's a legitimate avenue. At the September 8th meeting, it is a regular meeting, which means we have call to the public. The amount of time allotted for public comment could be constrained depending on the number of people who are there because we can go from 2 minutes to 1. So that is just a reality. After the September 8th meeting, the September 22nd hearing is really designed for anyone who wants to speak to the board, because it is a listening session, they will get 2 minutes. You don't get more than 2, and you can't give your time to somebody else. But everybody who wants to speak will be listened to that night, so there's no limitation on the duration. So if we're there 3 hours, we're there 3 hours. So you can email, you can come in person, and you can use the Let's Talk dialogue, and that's particular if you want answers to specific questions. Governing board members, some will choose to respond, some will choose not to respond. They have to be careful in terms of a reply all, because then it can be an open meeting law violation. They can't signal what they're thinking with respect to a decision they're going to make in a conversation electronically with other board members. So that's some of the risk involved. But to Leah's point, they do want to hear from people. They've been thinking about this. So you talked about how fast the timeline is. They've had the same access as the public has to all of the information all the way along. So that information has been there, so that part shouldn't be a surprise. No amount of information makes this an easier decision. And so the really tough part is after they have the conversation on the 8th and they listen on the 22nd, getting to the point where they say, okay, this is what we need to do next, that's the really tough part. So between the 22nd and October 6th, that's the mental processing time that will lead to hopefully a decision on the evening of the 6th.
If you want to email the governing board, isn't there one email address
There
that you can
is.
send to?
Yeah, so if you send it to govbrd.org, that gets to all the governing board members.
SUSD.org, right?
At SUSD.org, that's true. govbrd@susd.org. And that information it says it on our website, that goes to all 5 board members, but I see it and our general counsel sees it, because that makes sure that communication doesn't get lost. There are some times where people will email an individual board member, or they might email 2 board members, but in the way governance is designed, no individual board member has authority by themselves. They only have authority when they're seated at a properly agendized meeting, and then the decisions require a majority of the board to make the decision. So when you communicate to all, that ensures that information is being shared equally among the 5 decision makers, which is why we recommend using that website, or that web address.
And we have Dr. Bach now, who is our Director of Student Accountability, Enrollment, SIMAR, you might have heard. She gave us the information on Cheyenne 8th grades for this past year. So there were 102 Cheyenne 8th graders. Yep. And what were the numbers? What did we guess some of the guesses were? So we had 40 that went to DM, 4 went to Chaparral, and then 1 went to Saguaro, and then 57 were NA, meaning they went somewhere else, and so we could probably guess.
We also ran down that same road for Copper Ridge, and the numbers were more surprising, where it was a much more even split, and many Copper Ridge did go to Chaparral. So my apologies there. I was like, we are trying to be precise and clear, but sometimes, it's a lot.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, well, I'm going to hand it over to Andrea. She's going to do like SBC updates, but I just want to be very clear to our speakers it's very clear that your subject matter expertise on this and that you've worked very hard and that you've thought about it. I mean, that the fact that you're able to talk about this many students go to this school and this is how many go where, that is amazing and that is incredible, and we're really lucky to have you sharing that information with us, and it's really important. So thank you so much for all of our speakers. Dr. Menzel, thank you. We really appreciate you.
Yes, thank you. We know this is not taken lightly. Thank you so much. All right. Just a couple of quick updates. The biggest thing really is that next meeting that we have, and that is September 22nd? No, 23rd, right? At Chaparral, and that's about the bond. So we go from one big topic to another. So, and that will heavily impact our schools. What's that? Oh, we do? Yeah.
From 6 to
Here we go. There we go. 6 to 7:30 at Chaparral. Thank you. And so we'll be talking about the bond. So both of these meetings are very important concerning the future of our district. So hope to see you there. And at the end, it'll be mostly covered by the district and talking about the bond. And then at the end, we'll have a Q&A at the very end for SPC. And then our budget report, it's pretty simple, as you can see there. Just what we spend our money on is mostly, website, accounting, email, and whatnot. So, that leads us to our pitch, where all donations are welcome. It's the beginning of the year, so we're looking for our SPC reps for each school. There's going to be a form coming out where you can sign up and fill in who your SPC rep for your school will be. I think it's 2 for every school. And so we'll have a form where you can fill that out, and we hope you do. And also consider the $100 donation that we ask of the schools to help keep our lights on. And here we go, Zelle and Venmo as well. But all this information is available on our website. And I think that's it. That's it. Well, we're going to leave that there in case you want to give us money. So, all right. Well, thank you again for coming, and hopefully we'll see you in September. Thank you so much.